This week on Quadriga, Syrian peace poker. Assad with best cards? The international community is talking about a peace conference on Syria, but it seems just as likely the fighting will continue. The European Union has agreed to lift its ban on providing arms to the Syrian opposition. France and Britain are threatening to do so. Russia condemns that approach, although Moscow continues to provide military equipment to the Assad government. Meanwhile, the United Nations says sending weapons is not helpful, and it's concentrating instead on finding a political solution. Do the divisions among international players and within the Syrian opposition make it easier for Assad to hold on to power? And when will the suffering of the civilian population end? Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Those are the questions we want to address today on Quadriga. Hello and welcome. What's the likelihood that the peace conference will take place and will actually end the conflict? We want to talk about that today with three experts who've been following the situation in Syria closely. And my guests are Christina Eck. She has reported from Latin America as well as from several countries in the Middle East, from Morocco to Iran, since the 1960s, writing for the German magazine Focus and the Swiss daily newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung. And she's been living and working in Tunisia. Fawaz Tello is part of Syria's secular opposition movement. He's been living in exile here in Germany since 2012. Before that, he was a member of the Damascus Spring movement, and as a result of his political activities, he was imprisoned by the Assad regime from 2001 to 2006. And finally, I'm glad to welcome Azim El-Dafraoui. He is senior fellow at the Berlin-based Institute for Media and Communication Policy. A German-Egyptian, he's a political scientist and award-winning documentary filmmaker, and previously worked in the Middle East department of Germany's top think tank. And I'd like to stay with that poker metaphor that we have in our title and start out by asking all of you what odds you give the peace conference. Azim El-Dafraoui, what do you think? Will it go ahead, and does it have any chance of success?
I think in some ways the peace conference will happen. But currently I believe like this word peace or peace process especially, there's a lot of talk about the peace process. It's a very premature kind of wording. What I would like to see now is stronger calls for a general ceasefire, as the United Nations and the mediator Lakhdar Brahimi was trying to do a year or 2 years ago. I think the first thing we need to do now, even before talking about delivering arms and so on, we should really bring back the idea and really push for the idea of a ceasefire in order that at least the conference can happen in more serene circumstances.
If anything, it looks like we're going rather in the opposite direction at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, but that's why it's so crucially important, really, to bring back the idea and very forcefully of a ceasefire, you know, which worked out for a very, very short time at the beginning of the crisis, or let's put it frankly, at the beginning of the civil war, and we should work for that again.
Let's talk in just a moment about how that might happen and how to do so. Fawaz Tello, you used to be a part of the Syrian National Council. You resigned complaining about its very bitter divisions. The opposition remains terribly divided, uncertain at this point if it will even attend the peace conference. What do you think?
I think they will attend. But yes, there is a lot of chaos among the opposition, and will stay like that. This is unfortunately, this is part of the wrong approach which has been taken from the first step. There is a real powers inside Syria. These real powers have been just neglected by not only by the international community, but also by the Syrian opposition. And because of that, also we have chaos inside Syria. Chaos with all levels, political levels, military levels. This is part of our problem in Syria. I think in another point of view, the Syrian opposition has been under pressure all the time till this moment, while we don't see any kind of pressure among the regime itself. You mentioned for the ceasefire, for example. I think this is part of it's not a condition just preventing the situation to start a real negotiation which can lead you for a certain point when you have an agreement. While what's happening, like you said, it's a poker game. Actually, it's a gambling. And with gambling, everybody loses. This is the situation. Only the casino is winning at last.
Who's the casino?
Where's the casino?
Who is the casino? Yeah.
Actually, the casino is international community. International community himself.
I don't see they are winning.
Yeah, look, we have a major thing, a major point, and I keep asking all the politicians in all the diplomats, all the politicians in the West, American, Deutsch, etc. Are you really supporting get rid of this regime and building a real democracy in Syria? The answer will be yes. But actually, what they have been done is no, because what they are trying to do since the beginning of this revolution is just trying to keep the core of the regime. They want something like Yemenis, for example, scenario, which keep the core of the regime to have maybe a graduate reform. It will take 10, 20 years. It doesn't matter about that, and don't look for what really happening on the ground. It's not sorry.
I just want to stay with the casino a moment and talk about the role of the international community. Christina, they did decide now in the EU this week to lift the weapons embargo, allowing some European countries potentially to go ahead with weapons deliveries, as Sima El-Difraoui mentioned a moment ago, anything but a ceasefire in that case, if that does go forward. How helpful do you think that step was in terms of facilitating peace talks?
Well, not at all, because it shows clearly how divided even the West is and even Europe is. They don't have a common foreign policy. And that's very negative. How can they have a voice if the conference will go ahead next month, if they are so divided? And delivering weapons now, and they said only after the conference they will start delivering weapons. They missed the time where it was useful. And now it's much too late to deliver weapons. It only will continue the civil war.
The argument of those countries that wanted the embargo lifted is that this is a way to put pressure on Assad.
But it will be the contrary, because now he has a pretext not to attend the conference. And so it's a gambling, like you said, with this decision. And the worst is that it made quite clear how divided even Europe is. How will they speak with one voice if they can't agree on this very important point?
Let's take a brief look at just how, but we have some voices that show us just how divided Europe truly is in this case. Let's take a brief look at that report.
We would only take the step of sending arms in company with other nations, in carefully controlled circumstances and in compliance with international law. But this decision today gives us the flexibility in the future to respond to a worsening situation or to a refusal of the Assad regime to negotiate.
I'm personally not in favor of that, because I think European Union should hold the line, and we are a peace movement and not a war movement.
The lifting of the embargo makes the situation even more complicated, at the very least creating a serious obstacle along the path towards the international conference on Syria.
We should concentrate on enabling a political solution. The real answer to Syria's problem will be a political one. That's why I want to see this conference actually take place.
So, Mr. El-Difraoui, your view getting some support there from the German Chancellor, but indeed a cacophony of voices coming out of Europe.
Yeah, and I would like to come back to the image of the poker game. I think there is no poker game at all. It's not a game where the winner takes it all. I think we're in a game where there will be only losers. We are in a lose-lose situation. nobody will get out of it if there is not very soon, at least as I mentioned, a ceasefire. We are already very close to worst-case scenario, which means the total fragmentation of Syria, ex-Yugoslav scenario, and much worse, which will affect the neighboring countries. We'll go back to the Balkanization of Iraq, which is already in some ways Balkanized, further fragmentation of Lebanon and fragmentation of Syria, which will have long-term implications which will be disastrous for the region, for regional stability, for economic development. So again, we are not in a game anyway, but we're in a total lose-lose situation at this stage. So I really appeal to everybody to attend these conferences and to implement as quickly as possible a ceasefire and not to deliver very quickly weapons to aggravate the situation at this stage.
Fawaz Tello, what's your assessment on the subject of weapons deliveries? Do the Syrian rebels truly need weapons now in order to hold their own, in order to give them the strength to be a counterweight to the regime?
Actually, let me tell you that the Syrian rebels have been fighting since about 18 months without a real support from the international community, in spite of this embargo, which has been put up on the weapons. So I want to try to explain what's happening as I'm analyzing here and not giving a propaganda in this program. What's happening that the Russian and the European is trying to put pressure upon each other. The Russians saying, okay, we are going to deliver AS-300 missiles to the anti-craft missiles to the regime, and they will not do that. I'm sure about that.
Because you think they will not deliver them?
No, of course.
They're holding back on it right now, aren't they?
Because Israel, this is simply because this is the main point. They don't care who is Assad or anybody is ruling Syria, but this kind of missile shouldn't be in the hand of whatever who will be in Syria. And in the other hand, we have the European, which like you say, one stage, one play, but everybody got his rule. Said we are going to arm the Syrian opposition. By the way, we start to hear that about 1 year ago, 9 months ago. It's like a pit had been throwing to the opposition to draw them to the negotiations. And now they said this, if will happen, it will be starting from August after the Geneva is going to start. So they are connecting everything with each other. And also, I think they will not they are not going to arm the Syrian opposition. This is not part of their strategy. It's just a pressure before any Geneva negotiation.
So is the pressure effective, or are we in a lose-lose situation, as we just heard from Asim El-Difraoui?
I agree with Mr. Difraoui that it's a lose-lose totally situation now. But the question is how we are going to stop that. We already have very bad consequences is waiting for us. We have to do that because actually the move and the act is too late. This kind of conference will be very successful before 1 year, maybe 1.5 years. But now it's became out of date. I think there is a main obstacles here. Look, everybody go to Geneva, especially the regime and Hezbollah, look for Geneva, not a strategical way to get out of it.
It's supposed to be held in Geneva,
it's
just
maneuver.
a reminder.
Yeah. It's maneuver. It's maneuver, tactical, political maneuver to gain more time and to gain more land. This is what they are doing. Look on the ground. We have tens of thousands now of foreigner fighters from Hezbollah and Iranian and Shia fighters.
And Sunni fighters.
And Sunni, no. Sure. But those people simply holding the flags of sectarian war. It was very...
in the meantime.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Christina Erck, how do we stabilize the situation enough to get people talking to each other in a constructive way? What is the path forward? The idea, of course, behind lifting that weapons embargo to put pressure both on Assad, but naturally also on Russia. Is it working?
I don't see it. I don't see it's working, and as both of you said, it's a lose-lose situation, and the big loser is the Syrian people, of course, because the suffering is beyond imagination. And of course, as long as it drags on, the more the conflict will spread to the neighboring countries. And especially, I mean, Hezbollah is involved since a long time, but Hassan Nasrallah...
With Assad getting that support from neighboring countries and from Russia,
yeah, it's
what
a proxy
do you do?
war.
Yeah,
it's a proxy war on both sides.
Okay, so what do you do to equalize the odds?
Well, you can have a conference, but it's just winning time. Nothing else. I don't see that there can be a positive result. Only as long as the pressure from other countries, be it Israel, be it the United States, or very important Russia, then they have to sit together in earnest and discuss a ceasefire at least. But at the moment, when the Secretary General of the Hezbollah, who is very strong and very military disciplined fighters, when he openly says we have to back the Assad regime, because if not, we are losers and we are the big defenders against Israel. So that brings Israel on the plane, and who attacked twice some convoys of arms supposed to be sent to Hezbollah. So it's becoming, it's widening, and Lebanon is already dragged in since months, not only since 2 weeks or so. You have fightings in the northern city of Tripoli since more than a year. And the rocket attacks in the southern suburbs of Beirut, where Hezbollah has the headquarters, that shows that it's a globalization of the war, because you have the jihadis from other Arab countries who are fighting on the rebel side. And you have, of course, Iran and Hezbollah now supporting the regime. It's how do you curb these groups? And the danger is, well, Jordan is a poor country. It's overwhelmed with Syrian refugees. The same with Lebanon. There are almost as many Syrians now living in or seeking shelter in Lebanon than they have inhabitants. So the official numbers are not the exact ones, because the Syrians are afraid to register in Lebanon, because the Syrian Mukhabarat, the secret service, is still working in Lebanon. So it's a very fragile situation. And there is, of course, hope for this conference in Geneva that they can put a lid on this fire, a little bit at least. But
a few different strands there that I would like to pick up. But let's start with something we haven't talked about a lot, namely the role of the jihadis. Mr. El Difraoui has written a book about the mystique, the myths of jihad, and the way that it does attract young Islamic warriors to the cause. What is your assessment of the role of such groups in the Syrian opposition at the moment?
So even the jihadi fighters in Syria are still a minority, but they're a very, very influential minority. And as jihadis believe in some kind of salvation myth, some sectarian salvation myth, they're highly motivated fighters who don't mind dying, in a sense, that they believe once they die they'll enter paradise as martyrs straight away. So they're very dangerous and efficient fighters, and so they have some kind of influence far beyond their strengths in terms of numbers. I was reading reports from people who have been in Syria very recently and spending a lot of time with Syrian opposition fighters, and they're saying the jihadi serve as examples for other Syrian opposition fighters. The risk of the jihadi movement being very present in Syria is obviously that we might see the same thing as we have seen in Iraq. A huge influx of foreign fighters who don't really care about Syria, but care about global jihad, and who might eventually return to after having created havoc in Syria itself, might create havoc somewhere else. This brings me to 3 other very important points I would like to make. We were talking about...
Could we stay with the jihadis briefly and just ask Fawaz Tello his assessment?
We will stay with the jihadis,
okay, good.
But I'll stay with the jihadis. We didn't mention two other very important regional players, Saudi Arabia and Qatar so far.
Yeah, that's connected with the jihadis, of course.
That's very connected with jihadis, and especially Saudi Arabia, who has promoted jihad outside its own country for a long time, since decades, might itself find itself now in a very, very delicate situation, because those Saudi jihadis who have been there and those movements which the Saudis created, I wouldn't go so far into the 9/11 comparison here, might return to Saudi Arabia and start a new jihadi campaign against the Saudi state, for example. But I think we should really talk about Qatar and Saudi Arabia at some stage.
Yeah.
In this,
yes, indeed. I'd like to come back to that and to the idea of a sectarian conflict across the whole region. But let's stay on that jihadi question. Fawaz Tello, what's your assessment, knowing the opposition from the inside? How strong is the influence of extremist groups, and is it growing?
Actually, like Mr. Al-Naim said, they are still a minority, but a very effective minority. This is a reality.
Minority.
Minority, sorry. This is a real fact on the ground. And unfortunately, before 1 year, we don't have those people in Syria. For 1.5 years, the revolution was going on without those people. But the neglect of the international community don't care about what you hear about the politicians, like the American, and how they are conscious about. There's a joke, by the way, in Syria said, "Oh, Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Mrs. Clinton is not expressing they are worried." Since 1 week, what's the problem? They have something. So thus, we don't have a real support for the people who is fighting on the ground. Yes, since 1 year, we start to have a small amount of weapons, light weapons and ammunition from Qatar and Saudi Arabia through Turkey. This is a fact. But it's still a very small amount. We don't have any anti-craft for missiles, etc., because there is a lot of pressure by the international community, especially by the United States and the European, for not delivering that. While in the other side, you have, for example, 1,400 ton of weapons and ammunition every week reach to the Syrian regime. So all the support for the other side, without any support for the Syrian side.
This is why I asked you a moment ago, do the rebels need more weapons to equalize the situation? You did not directly answer my question before.
Actually, these rebels, since 2 years, they are trying to balance their situation, and they are succeeding with that, with this small amount of weapons which they have. The main question is that, yes, there is a problem of jihadis is going to be created in Syria. How we can deal with it? I think, and this is what my approach for that. We should have a real partnership from the beginning, and still now we should have this real partnership with those people who is fighting. It's not putting more pressure for not supplying the arms, to push the opposition and to be weak and to go to this conflict, because we are in this way telling the hopeless people inside, look, ask for the help from the devil. Doesn't matter what is devil, jihadis or not jihadis. And this is a situation. Look, I want to go back for 1 minute, please. The main obstacles we have in this negotiation, in all the crises, is Bashar Assad, his family, some people around him. This is the real pressure should be implemented by the international community to get rid of this one, like what happened in Yemen.
How? They would say they've been trying to do that without success. They would say it is all in the hands of Russia.
Look.
How?
Yes, sending threatening that we are going to send 10 cruise missiles to get rid of you if you didn't leave Syria without 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. Simply. Or we go to the Russian and said, the American, not me, look, we are going to be involved directly. We will really support the opposition with weapons. And they know that. If we have real weapons and real support for the weapons, within a few months we will get rid of the regime. Or you have to make a real pressure to get rid of Bashar Assad. They will respond for that. Because we don't have a serious pressure, look, the American is just putting the Russian as a proxy for their policy. Actually, they are very close with the Russian with their policy.
Americans are very weary of war and Barack Obama has been very reluctant to make any kind of commitment. Christina Erck, do you see the U.S. moving toward playing a stronger and more direct role, and would it really be helpful?
Twice no, I would say, because it's the experience with Iraq and Afghanistan where they left just a mess, much worse than before. And even if Senator McCain now slipped in for a couple of hours to northern Syria, because he is the vice pro sending weapons, but I think one has to go back a little bit also to Libya. And that's why they are so divided, the United States and Russia, because Russia agreed to help Syria and have a no-fly zone. And then it was much more. It was much more than just the no-fly zone. And that's what Russia never will forget and never will forgive. And that's why they are backing Assad. But it's not only Russia backing them, it's also Iran. And I think that is a very important point too, because Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they are very much afraid about Iran and they want to curb Iran.
Briefly leaving that aside, one more question on the U.S. Obama, of course, had declared a red line in regard to the use of chemical weapons.
Yes.
But
where's the red line?
Yeah.
There are chemical weapons were used, so the excuse...
Has it been a problem that he declared the red line and didn't act on it?
Well, of course, in a certain sense, it's a problem, because where is the red line? Now they said that chemical weapons were used in a small scale, but nevertheless. But then they said, well, it's not clear if the regime used it or maybe some rebels used it. So, undecisive.
Okay, please.
No, please go ahead.
Chemical weapons. To kill a few hundred or few thousand people with chemical weapons, or to kill 100,000 people shooting them, there is no big difference. Regarding this red line, Mr. Obama, look, there is a lot of pressure inside the American administration against Mr. Obama, because actually he is not taking any serious acts. It's not to send the military group to Syria, or even the no-fly zone. We are talking, for example, about arming the opposition. This is not direct involved or at least as allowing for the European or for the Qatar and Saudi to give a real support of arming the opposition. There is a real pressure inside the American administration, and Mr. Obama just trying to respond to this pressure, but actually he is not serious to do anything. Look,
when you look at what's happening in Iraq today, are you convinced that U.S. intervention would really be a constructive contribution?
You can't compare with two situations. It's totally different situation. Nobody asked the American to come to Syria. And by the way, the Syrian people will fight the American if they just come to Syria. Nobody asked them to come to Syria. We are talking about totally different situation.
Can we really be so sure? The American writer Tom Friedman, who knows the Middle East very, very well, said recently he thinks we're no longer talking about an Arab Spring. We're talking about an Arab 30 years war of religion, a sectarian conflict across the entire Middle East. This comes back, of course, to the idea of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, lined up against Shiite countries like Iran. Do you think that is what's in store?
Oh, we're talking about two things at the same time. We're talking about an Arab awakening. We're talking about an Arab Spring. Tremendous things have happened, and we always knew that this would be very, very difficult transitions. And we always knew that there is a stronger Shiite-Sunni divide in the Arab world, which bears risks, but it doesn't need to stay that way. It doesn't really need to stay that way. That's why it's so crucial to stabilize places like Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, which are the playing grounds in terms of the Shia-Sunni divide. And I would like to make very brief 3 points again. Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We also need to apply a tremendous amount of pressure on those countries not to use Syria for their proxy war against the Shiites. And if we don't do that, we won't have any chance to pacify Syria. Second point, talking about a ceasefire again. The initial Lakhdar Brahimi plan to me, seems to be still quite valid. The Arab League takes for once again a very active stance. Everybody agrees on a ceasefire controlled by the Arab League, eventually by the United Nations, at least for some time to stabilize the situation. And this brings me to my third point, the military option. Let's look again at Libya, for example. Everybody in the West is claiming this was an easy intervention, in terms that it lasted a couple of weeks to overthrow Gaddafi. Syria is not Libya in terms of geography. It's very difficult in terms of support for the different fraction. I believe Bashar, through the Alawis and the Christians and other groups, has still much more support than Gaddafi ever had. But you know what the death toll of the Syrian intervention was? 50 or 60,000 Libyan dead. This out of a people of 6 million people. So the cost of these interventions are tremendous. If you apply this to 30 million Syrians, we'll get to a death toll of 250 or 300,000 just for a couple of weeks in intervention. And we already have between 80 and 100,000 Syrians dead. So I believe arming is no solution and a military intervention is no solution at all. Again, just purely technically military. If Great Britain and France push for the armament of the Syrian opposition, which kind of arms are they going to provide? What are they going? No. But I mean, what are they going to? Which kind of arms would be efficient to bring down the Assad regime? I think either it's a full-scale military intervention. If you give a couple of anti-aircraft missiles or a couple of tanks, this will just prolong and aggravate a horrible civil war.
So, Mr. Tello, 2 points there. Military intervention, basically completely counterproductive. And why not try the Brahimi peace plan? What's your response?
Actually, I want to remind you that Mr. Kofi Annan, and before that we have the Arab League have been sent their observer to Syria, and the regime has destroyed that opportunity since 1 year ago. It's already have been used this way. We are not talking about military intervention.
Let's try again.
Military end or solution for this crisis. If we have to go for a political end for this, I told you, there's main obstacles. Bashar Assad and his family and some people around him. The main pressure should be how to get rid of those people with any means. In this way, we can open the gate for some people inside the regime to start this negotiation.
How to do it? So to explain to me concretely how to get rid of the Assad clan.
Giving the right message for the Assad regime and for the Russian by the international community that we are going to supply arming the Syrian opposition, and we are going to help them even with get rid of him physically. It's part of the options we have. This is the way how to can open the negotiations with peaceful.
What part of the international community would you realistically expect to be willing to do that? Realistically, to whom would you address that message?
To the American.
You really think you're going to persuade them?
No. Till now, we couldn't persuade them because I told them from the beginning they have in their mind a Yemeni scenario which pushed them to believe that this regime, look, we are talking about Alawis minority who is controlling the whole country since 50 years. They are 10% minority. They are controlling everything, the security, the army, etc., etc., etc. And the international community like to keep the structure of the state. While this is impossible, it's to understand we can't wait and said, you have to do that, you have to get rid of jihadis, you have to go to the political solution. We have to prepare the situation for the political solution. Otherwise, it's just a wishful thinking, since, like we have hearing since 2 years, and we will push for more fragmentation for the area. And let me comment about the sectarian war in the area. Before 5 years, in 2006, when the Israeli attacked Hezbollah in Lebanon, 500,000 of Shia has been crossed the border to Syria. Half of the Shia of Lebanon. They have been welcomed warmly in Syria including Al-Qusayr, which have been under the siege right now. They are really warmly, they don't have a tent. They have been in houses, inside the houses, inside home. They have been very good life during these few months that they go back. So it was not a sectarian feeling. What's going on now? Look, there is an Iranian plan for all the area. This plan had been started in 1979 after Khomeini take over in Iran. And it's using a lot of tools and a lot of instruments. Part of it is talking that they are fighting Israel. One of these instruments to support Hezbollah, and now Bashar Assad is main player in this big plan for the Iranians. So they are fighting for their interest. It's not a Sunni Shia, at least from the Sunni side.
But you raise a very important point, We are in this power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for which the region plays a tremendous cost. So those huge players create or exacerbate antagonisms to a degree which present a high risk to the whole region.
Then you have to see also the background, because the United States officially steps back, but they are training since a long time, either on the Turkish side, on the border with Syria, and on the Jordanian side, they are training rebels. They are providing also some kind of weaponry. So the CIA is present there since a long time. So it's not the official line. And well, and one has to look also at Israel, because in the last days there's a lot of talking about going to war. And I mean,
tell us a little bit more about the role of Israel and the role of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, their recent announcements very much raising concern that it's also changing the odds in the conflict.
Of course.
What kind of pressure can we bring on Hezbollah? By what means? And what do you expect the role of Israel to be as we move forward?
Well, Israel is very worried, of course. And that's why they attacked twice weapons convoys from Syria to Lebanon. If they can really stop it is another question. But quite interesting is that in the end of the 90s, the Lebanese airline opened the direct flights Beirut-Tehran. And about 2 years later, there were no more flights. And I asked the manager what happened, and he said, too much smuggling. And so I said, Hezbollah weapons? He said, you know. So that was a direct link always, and it still exists in some way. Now it's flying to Damascus and comes on. And you can't control the border if you know the mountain area, and it's not controlled. And you were mentioning Qusair, what's now in the real and the point of interest, the city. It's very important for the Assad regime because it's the link between Damascus and the coastline where the Alawites come from. And it's very important also for the rebels because it's close to the Lebanese border in the north where all the weapons from Lebanon come to the rebels. So there is, when you look at the prices of a machine gun, you could get it in the beginning for $50 in Beirut, and the prices were rocketing. So it's a lot of smuggling going on. And Israel, of course, must be worried because they knew in 2006, well, they attacked Lebanon every half year. They bombed the infrastructure, the power stations, bridges, main roads, so every half year, because they didn't want Lebanon to come up as maybe becoming dangerous as regional partners and economic partners, and the other one you can't forget. But then in 2006, they invaded Lebanon more or less. And then they had to realize that Hezbollah is really a power they can't fight. And everyone in Lebanon said, okay, they were withdrawing the Israelis. It's an unfinished business. They will come back. And so maybe they are just waiting for the pretext now that Hezbollah is involved in Syria. And with Assad regime, father and son, the Israelis were happy in some way because there were never, ever any attacks crossing the border. And so it was a stable situation.
Azim El-Difawi, are we likely to see a hot conflict start up again in Lebanon?
It's already.
I won't pronounce myself on the likelihoods, but there is a risk. Obviously, there is a risk. But let me put this question into a bigger regional picture. What's happening in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq is really the product of a horrible, badly done decolonization of the whole area. We're still thinking and talking in terms of nation states. But what we're really talking about are ex-Ottoman countries, which have been managed totally different, with huge minority problems, with overlapping minorities, sometimes with borders drawn by semi-drunk French or English officers. And now we're coming back to all this, and if we really open the lid, if Syria explodes, we'll go to this pre-colonial situation, where we'll find totally new regional alliances. A Sunni alliance between Iraqi Sunnis who feel they're in a minority and Syrian Sunnis. So the potential risks of this breakup of the states, the Syrian Kurds who look very much to the Iraqi brothers who have already achieved a degree of autonomy, the Tripoli Sunnis out of Lebanon who feel they're a minority in their own country and which would like to come closer to the Syrian Sunnis. So
sounds very much like the Balkans, which of course
the
was the example that you used in the beginning.
That's a bad decolonization of the Ottoman Empire. Let's really go back in history. So we have exactly the same stuff, and we'll really have this kind of situation, which might be in some way quite positive, but can have tremendous risks.
Yeah. Fel Westello, last word for you. The peace conference is supposed to be held in June, possibly early July. What do you think? Will it bring any results?
If you don't put the military option on the table, really, you can't win with the political track.
Okay. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.